So first thing is, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lexi Papaspirou. I'm the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter, and really pleased to welcome you all to the Signatory Forum on data disclosure. So today, I'm really excited to be able to be speaking to Kat Wildman from Powered by Diversity. And I'd love to just hand over to you, Kat, first to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I did science, went straight into technology, spent 20 years in technology, and then because I'd always been a woman in STEM, I was really into the whole EDI topic and used to talk and speak about it a lot. When it came to the real nuts and bolts of, right, how do we actually close our gender pay gap, I started researching and just completely fell into this research, and then spent the next 3 years doing that. Ended up starting a business, Powered by Diversity, which is what I do today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kat. So, folks, we're going to be talking about DE&I data disclosure with Kat, who's got some fantastic expert views on this. If you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. But Kat, I'd love for us to start with a bit of a overall general question for everyone in this room, which is, if we're thinking about like the basics of like, what is DE&I data? What are we talking about here? Can you just give us a view of what that means?
Yes, so I feel very strongly about this topic. The main pillar of Powered by Diversity is data. So we have a platform which helps you to gather all of the data that you need in order to find and diagnose your gaps, and then get pointers for how to close them. So one of the things that lots of organizations come to us with in the beginning is, well, we've got our DE&I data already, and it was really hard to get, etc. What they mean is they've asked people to tick their diversity boxes. So they have taken, they've done a demographic survey essentially. And what that does is it is completely separate from the inclusion part. And when you do that, it tends to put people into three very negatively feeling groups. And one ambivalent group of, oh, I'll just answer it, it's fine. And so it can be very damaging. You can get really low response rates. People don't feel protected to give that data. And actually, once people have got that data, you know, it's the what now question of, well, you've made a pie chart, but what does that mean? Is it a good pie chart? What is a good pie chart? And that's part of the reason why we take the demographic data at the end. So to me, DE&I data is inclusion, belonging, professional opportunities, leadership and values, the training that you've received, the actions the organisation is taking, your own attitudes and beliefs, any harassment, discrimination, victimisation you've experienced, or marginalisation. And then we'll ask at the end for your demographics, because it makes all that data relevant. So if you want to have a look which data is spiking, which groups are raising a flag about which issues that we've just asked about, you can see based on their demographics. For me, building a pie chart of the organization, unless you are directly comparing it to your customer group and you know the pie chart of your customers and you're like, are we representing them really well? But even then, who is going to be, you know, your accounting team? If your accounting team is majorly one demographic group and your customer set is one demographic group, is that accounting team going to be talking directly to that customer group? It just, to me, the pie chart approach doesn't make sense unless it's completely coupled with, we're asking for this because we want to know how you feel about all these different things to do with inclusion.
That is so interesting how you're talking about inverting the focus of what diversity and inclusion data means. And I think for a lot of people that we speak to at Tech Talent Charter, it's this idea, everyone immediately pictures the survey that says, what is your gender, what's your ethnicity? That's what people think of when they think of diversity and inclusion data. And I think it's really interesting that you frame that as, actually, we want to hear how people feel about their sense of belonging, their sense of inclusion. And then that demographic stuff is an afterthought. Because I think a lot of organizations will understandably approach it from that flipped way that a lot of companies traditionally would collect this information. And I think that links to something that, you know, companies, we all want to operate in a way that is safe and the best practice and the done thing. And I think these diversity characteristics, particularly ones that are protected by the Equalities Act, they're known things, they're known factors that we understand better how to ask about. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of ask you, Kat, you've mentioned a few things already around what should these survey questions potentially be asking, both from how you're doing it at Powered by Diversity in terms of what you're looking for people's experiences to be about, but then what are some of those demographics that maybe aren't new and emerging, that aren't obvious, that aren't necessarily just gender or race or age. Could you give us a view of both of those angles as to what you think is important to ask about?
Yes. So for me, my definition of why you would want diversity in the organization is so that you can do better business, so that you can have a better business. Yes, it is the right thing to do, but everybody who is a signatory, they want diversity and inclusion because it makes their business better. Their employees will be more engaged, they'll be more productive, they'll work harder, but most importantly, they're creating innovative outputs that are going to appeal to lots and lots and lots of different people. So if you're a company who only have this square covered in terms of your demographics, you're going to be likely creating products that appeal to this square. If you want to appeal to the whole square, you need all sorts of different people coming at it from different angles. Have we thought about this? Or just to play devil's advocate for a second, this group, etc. So in terms of that, what you need is psychological safety. So you need these diverse people to be around the table where the decision-making processes are happening, and you need them to feel psychologically safe enough, supported, to be able to play devil's advocate or go, can I just put forth a slightly controversial opinion here? Or I've got an idea. It's that, you can bring in diversity until you're blue in the face, but unless those different perspectives are getting listened to, getting airtime around the tables where those decisions are being made, it's completely and utterly pointless. You're literally doing it so that your corporate photo can look different, can look more appropriate. But actually, when you get right down to the organizations that we see that are doing this really well, is they've got right down to that understanding, and they're like, oh, okay, this is my customer group. I need to be able to appeal to them. This is the market that I'm trying to reach. I need to be able to appeal to them. We need people who are going to help that happen. We need those people just to go, oh, actually, can I just raise something on this? I'm not sure this advert is making the right tone because X, or, this product would be much more appealing to people like me. I'm just speaking for myself here. If such and such thing, and people around who have never walked a mile in your shoes might never come up with that idea. Those are the companies who get it, and it makes everything easier. So that hiring for diversity thing doesn't become, are they the best candidate for the job though, because Mike Smith looks pretty good as well. It's more, we need different perspectives, and we've got 7 Mike Smiths already who went to that university, who had that education. We need someone different. We need someone with that perspective. So come in. I've totally forgotten the second question you asked now.
Not at all. I think it's really interesting what you're saying there, because it's this idea of what we're trying to understand from collecting diversity and inclusion data, which maybe we shouldn't be calling diversity and inclusion data like that. Maybe that's a question we need to be talking about here. What we're trying to ascertain is there good psychological safety in the team that can then feed that better business argument that you put forward. And I think that's something that we hear a lot. Sometimes it's more from small organizations or organizations that are on a growth journey, that are highlighting how it's hard to underline the business case for collecting this type of information and doing this type of analysis. And one of the things, yeah, exactly. I think it's a really interesting and valid challenge for them to be flagging, and the right thing to be doing. That there is obviously a lot of literature that underlines how great diversity does have an impact on the bottom line. But if you're in a smaller organization, how hard is it to prove that? And you mentioned something that I think is really interesting here, which is around that employee engagement metric, because that's a much closer metric to look at than looking at what is our diversity and how can we what is the correlation between our diversity stats and our bottom line performance.
Yeah.
Employee engagement brings that conversation and those metrics much closer to home in a way that maybe that could be a more compelling business case. And I'd love to, I guess I'm reflecting that back to you a little bit. That's what I'm hearing in what you're saying, Kat. But what do you think?
Exactly. So for me, the people who are still baking the pie chart, they haven't quite linked that business case bit. Once that penny drops, they'll never make the pie chart again, and they'll never think twice about, we're going to give it to that person or that person. They'll be like, we need different brains in here. We need different brains. And the more you do it, the more you will want to do it, because you'll see success. But that's exactly it. So a lot of people see our assessment and they're like, there's a lot of crossover with our employee engagement survey here. And they usually end up doing just the one. So ours is undeniably a very deep dive in terms of DE&I, but What it's asking is, what are your feelings of belonging and inclusion? And what we've done is we've broken inclusion and belonging right down. So if I ask you, how do you feel like you belong at the organization? You could say no. And yours could be, well, because there's a group that always goes for lunch together at lunchtime and I never get invited. For me, it could be because I don't have a pal in the office yet. I don't have someone's desk to go and sit on and have a cup of tea and have a little whinge and a moan maybe, or ask about their weekend. But for someone else, it may be they may not feel included because they don't have the flexibility they need to meet their caring responsibilities, or they don't get invited to after work drinks, or it's not even about the social scene at all. It could be there's an aspect of belonging which is about pride in yourself and pride in your organization. So we did all that research to break it down, and so actually instead of it really gives you the tools you need to make actual change. And instead of going inclusion, belonging and running them all together and they just lose all meaning, actually, let's look at the aspects of inclusion that aren't working for particular groups. And then when you look at it, we've got this amazing, I actually screenshotted it. I was going through it with a member the other day and said, do you mind if I anonymously screenshot this question? Because on aggregate, I think it was the social scene of this organization matches my social norms, or one of those questions, or I feel included in the social scene of this organization. On aggregate, 99% green. There was 1% red. And I expanded the demographics, which they all do. And there was the religiously marginalized groups came out on top, big red line, raising a flag. No, I do not feel included by the social scene of this organization. And you would have missed that, on these really top line, oh, let's just do an inclusion and diversity survey, 9 questions, get it done. You would have totally missed that. And that's why the demographic groups are important, not to go look at our pie chart of all these different religions, to go, are they okay? Are they healthy? Are they happy here? Are they productive? Are they included? Do they feel like they're getting professional opportunities? And to bring those things out and go, oh, right, we've got a problem here with our social scene. And it was a very easy one to fix. It was very alcohol based. They had a lot of religiously minoritized employees who didn't drink. And it was such an easy one to change. But that's true inclusion and diversity data. And I just wish more people were doing it.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. I think we've done a really interesting exposition here of what are we talking about. Let's establish some foundational principles about what diversity and inclusion data is and is not. I'd love to circle back though to that particular example you gave with religion. So with the Tech Talent Charter, we typically ask our signatories what diversity information are they measuring amongst their employee base, and the ones that we typically are asking about here are gender, ethnicity, orientation, age, religion, presence of disability or health conditions, neurodiversity, and there's one that I've missed that has completely gone out of my head, social mobility, that's it, socioeconomic background. Are there other lenses or segmentations of your data that you're doing in that last part of your survey? Are there other groups that we should be listening for because there's a specific area of need there?
So the only ones that we break down further, we do break down disability further. We ask what sort of a disability, if they're happy to disclose that, what sort of a neurodivergence, what sort of additional needs they're talking about. That rarely comes out in the data because those groups tend to be so small, but it's really good to be able to say to the organisation, did you know you've got these groups in your organisation? Do you have provisions for them? And then we've got single parents. So we pull people out who are single parents specifically. We ask them if they, we also ask people if they've been pregnant whilst at the organisation, because that's a whole nother factor. And it usually pops up in the professional opportunities section where you see people say, and also the inclusion section, especially when it comes to the social scene. And we ask about socioeconomic status as well. The other important thing is the intersections. So yes, those groups are really important, but actually what ours does is it surfaces the most negative group or intersection, whatever that may be. So if it's female, parents with a disability and they are the most negative group, that's the one that will pop up to the top, because those intersections are what's really important in that data. So yes, that's what we collect. And I think beyond that, looking into the realms of potentially mental health and things like that, which we don't tend to have a crossover with necessarily unless they class it as an additional need or a disability.
That's really interesting, because in our recent survey that we've done, we're about to release an annual report on this. We're also hearing similar things, that organisations are starting to really focus on mental health and wellbeing as its own area, rather than adding it in with disability. And the same thing, we've seen that for neurodiversity as well, having its its own focus area beyond looking at it in context of disability.
Yeah.
And obviously there are really interesting crossovers with parents that you mentioned there. What we're hearing a lot is, again, this idea of caring responsibilities more broadly. So caring for older relatives as well as younger ones. So we're seeing more of that kind of emerging as well. But when we're talking about intersections, this leads on to something, a whole different area that I reckon we could probably easily talk an entire hour about. So I would love us to talk a little bit about privacy and ethics around diversity and inclusion data, because this is something that comes up so much in conversations that we have with our signatories around the pushback and the resistance they see for employees not wanting to share diversity and inclusion data about themselves with the company because of privacy concerns and because of different views on the ethics of collecting this information. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that I would love for us to speak to here, some of the challenges that our signatories raise are that with GDPR, for example, what we might want to collect as diversity and inclusion information, some of it sits inside GDPR and some of it sits outside. And how do you then grapple with that with a system where you might be dealing with thousands and thousands of people? So there's a GDPR angle to it. There's also this kind of ethical question that comes up, and we hear this from, for instance, large organizations who are bidding for big contracts and they need to demonstrate social value as part of the Social Value Act, for example, for a government contract. You need to show how you're doing good for society. And many organizations will use their diversity and inclusion stats that they collect from this type of exercise. They'll get their pie chart out and be like, hey, we're so diverse, we're great for society. And that kind of commoditization of individual employees' data to achieve a profit generating activity for a business, that really doesn't sit well with some employees. So there are like lots of different reasons why we're hearing this sense of like reluctance for individuals to want to participate in these processes. And I would love to just hear from your point of view that when we know that these concerns are really high in the public eye and people are reluctant to share this information, and oftentimes folks who are in minority groups are the ones who are in particular sometimes more likely to not want to share that information. How do you get around that, being an organization that your business is predicated on encouraging people to give this information?
Yeah, 100%. So it's because they've just told us their deepest, darkest feelings. So let's go back to these 3 negative feeling groups that I said about when you're asking the pie chart data. So I would be suspicious as well. And I have been suspicious before, even though I know why people are asking. I know why I'm asked, in an interview process, for example, to tick the boxes about myself, because they're trying to make sure they're bringing in a varied group. However, if I had, so one of the negative groups is those who are not open about certain characteristics of theirs or certain groups to which they feel they belong or the ways they identify. So people with invisible disabilities, people who are not out about their orientation, people who are not out about their gender identity, even parental status, religion. There's loads of things that people don't know, socioeconomic status. There's lots of people who, unless you can see it, that it's easy to be invisible. Well, it is invisible by definition. And so this group will feel super suspicious because they're like, why do you want to know? Are you going to try and flush me out? Why would I tell you now? If I haven't chosen to tell you, why am I going to tell you because you sent me a form to tick? The disclosure rate of that group is minimal. So you're not going to find out any new information. You're not going to get that super important data that you need. The second group is those people who tick a lot of boxes. So they are diverse. Everyone's diverse. I hate individuals being described as diverse, but they tick a lot of boxes. And they will maybe be wondering, and as we found in our research, they'll be thinking, well, what does that mean? If there's lots of people ticking lots of the same boxes, are you done then? Is that it? Does your pie chart look acceptable? And / are you going to wheel me out now to talk in front of the whole company about my protected characteristic? Some people might want to. A lot of people have gone there to do a job, which is not diversity and inclusion. And, a lot of this stuff, diversity, inclusion and things that happen to people is super personal and often very traumatic. And, are you really going to want to sit in a room full of 650, virtual or not, of your closest peers and colleagues and leaders and tell them, oh, you know, here's all the terrible traumatic things that have happened to me in my working life, and here's a very personal part of me, you know, be it my religion, my ethnicity, my identity, my orientation, however you describe it. Are you going to wheel me out to be like the poster person for my characteristic? And the third group, which is potentially the most dangerous group, are the people who feel like they're not ticking enough boxes. So people, you know, we've heard about, you know, middle-aged white men. I hear middle-aged white men every single day in the job that I do. People talking about, you know, there's a lot of middle-aged white men at the leadership team of this organization or whatnot. And those middle-aged white men might be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not ticking enough boxes. This has been billed to me as, you know, diversity and inclusion is hugely important to this company. It's really essential. And here's what they're sending me. And I've got to see basically how important am I to this company? And they're comparing themselves against, in their minds, what is a diverse person. And they're going, but what about all the value I bring? It's all that information is asked for so out of context of the value that they bring to the organization that they feel they bring, but also their feelings of belonging, inclusion, professional opportunities, about the values, about how they're treated, and so on. It's so out of context that that third group can become very negative detractors, and they can often be the ones, you know, heard going, what a load of nonsense, you know, because in their mind they've just been, that fear has been triggered in them, so they're thinking diversity inclusion is very important. I haven't ticked enough boxes, therefore I must not be very important. I'm now afraid for my job, and I want to dismantle this whole EDI thing because it might mean that my future here is in jeopardy. Oh, it's all a load of nonsense. What a waste of time. We've got proper work to do here. Thinking, you know, I'm working really hard. I'm really valuable. Why are you focusing on this? Because it's not about me and it makes me feel in danger. And that's one thing that people, when they realize that, they go, oh my gosh, that's why we got really low engagement rates. Or, okay, I totally understand. It puts a whole new lens on it. And so in terms of the low engagement rate and privacy, you can understand why just asking for demographics alone would make a lot of people feel highly uncomfortable, because the one thing they want to know is why. You need a big why with flashing lights and have fireworks coming out to really compel people on, you know, why you want this data. So the way we do it is we ask them their deepest, darkest thoughts and feelings and beliefs about the organization. And because of that, at the end, we say, would you like to tell us your demographics? And we give them a list to pick from because it makes data easier to wrangle, as you know. There's a prefer not to say option with every single question, but our disclosure rate is super high consistently, because people have just said, I felt excluded because I'm a single parent, you know, I'm socioeconomically at a low point in my life, I can't afford the social scene of this organization, sometimes I feel like I'm talked over in meetings, and actually, yeah, that person did make a joke and it was kind of a bit sexual, and I'm going to tick that box and put a few comments in, and because they've told us about it's because of my femaleness, it's because of my single parentness, it's because of my, you know, 40 to 45ness, whatever that thing is that they want, that they've got off their chest, they're much more likely to disclose it. And indeed they want to, because they're like, I want you to find my gap. I've just told you my thing and I want you to know it. And so we have a high disclosure rate. However, it's totally anonymized, which is another thing that really helps gather data, which is not massively helpful if you're gathering your data in an HR system where it's attached to somebody's name. However, if you have that big glittering why and you say to your employees, look, we want to make sure that so one thing that we get consistently on our reports is people want to know that data is being monitored. So that can be pay data, it can be promotions data. People jump up and down about monitoring the receipt of non-pay rewards and awards. So who's winning the employee of the month, who's winning the sale, who's winning the values ambassador of the month, those things that people get invited up for. They want to see the data on that. They want to see that the organization is monitoring for fairness the whole way through, you know, interview processes, who's getting to interview, who's getting the job, and so on. What are the manager levels, pay, you know, all these different things. If you sell it to them like that, as well as exit as well, you know, make sure we're not disproportionately losing one group over another. If you sell it to them like that is your big glittering why with fireworks coming out. We're going to make all this data transparent. We want to see, not even transparent necessarily. We want to monitor this data. We're doing a piece of work to make sure everything here is fair and equitable. And therefore, we'd like to know your data. If you'd like to disclose it, if you'd like to see this data, then please share. Even something like that would be more compelling. But the GDPR-ness of it is, unless it is actually being used, you know, don't gather useless personal data that you're just not going to use. like, you know, PII that you're just going to have hanging around in the system. And that why is also the answer to the GDPR risk, you know, because you want to monitor based on age, because you want to monitor based on orientation and so on.
There's so many directions I want to take this in. So I think a couple of things that are really standing out to me there, Kat, that you were saying. One of you were talking there about the middle-aged white man, and in the tech space, obviously, we know that this is language that gets used quite a lot. And something that I'm acutely aware of is this idea that there is a perception that diversity and inclusion data is feeding unfairness in one way or another. Yeah. And that's the negative view of it. But actually what we need to be doing, you mentioned the word fairness. I think it's so interesting that everything that we're doing around diversity and inclusion data and understanding how employees feel is about helping to show how we're trying to make things fairer for everyone. And fairness doesn't mean that it's all about just supporting the needs of one specific group. And I think that's such an interesting one, because one of the things that comes up quite a lot is this idea of, oh, does fairness mean everyone achieves the same outcome, everyone has to get the same? And the flip side of that is, oh, actually, is fairness that you just get out what you put in? And I think sometimes that these different groups that we're looking at, they are more drawn to one view of what fairness means. And this is a really difficult thing for organizations to grapple with. And so being really articulate and pointed about the actions that you're taking within an HR system, for example, to show good fairness practices is so crucial. And I know that's something that a lot of platforms and consultants in this area are really trying to help organizations deliver, is a sense of what does fairness mean in the organization and how is that being looked after. So we're hearing things about, for instance, fair work allocation, who is getting those projects that that give them the career growth opportunities. So fairness can be really pointed to in a lot of different ways within an HR system. So what you were saying there about who is getting that employee of the month thing, these are really important details that it's important to track. And that leads to something else that I'd love to just give you a bit of props on, really, because it's sometimes we do hear this feedback from organizations that employees don't want to share their data in a system alongside data of what they're getting paid or who's getting promoted. And so sometimes having that external view is something that organizations have told us really helps. So working with a third party to collect this information can sometimes be a good way to kind of kickstart a new type of diversity and inclusion survey activity in a way that can help employees feel a little bit safer at first to start sharing this information, knowing that it's not just being put alongside who's going to get a promotion or not, or who's going to go on a performance review or not. So that's that really interesting thing about separation of concerns coming in, that I think is really, really interesting and worthy of a lot of consideration. Cool. So with all of this in mind, I guess we've talked a little bit around GDPR. One of the other concerns that comes up in this whole privacy question is to do with global data collection. What we're hearing a lot is that organizations are really getting on top of diversity and inclusion data. They want to do it, but they want to do it at a global level. Yeah. Obviously, there are massive issues with collecting this type of information depending on the legalities of the region that you're in. I'd love to hear, Kat, are you working with any organizations that have this issue, and how are you approaching it?
Yes, lots. So it's hard sometimes to find organizations which are just UK based. So when we first launched, we're like, well, just stick to the UK, stick with what we know, it's okay, everything is legal to ask here. But then you very quickly find organizations and they're global. They've got an office here, they've got an office there, and then we branched out to massive global companies who've got offices everywhere. So the only countries where we don't operate are countries where it's illegal to identify as LGBTQ+. And there's still a surprisingly large number of those. And that would literally put people's lives in danger. So we don't ask certain demographics. We can flex our demographics essentially based on the location that they're in. So in France, where it's illegal to ask about race and religion, ethnicity, we don't ask those questions. We also don't ask about orientation and disability because the research that we did with lots and lots of French EDI groups was that it's just too taboo. We're not ready yet. And actually, we have baked in questions which can give you a really strong indicator of how those groups are getting on. You know, I have been excluded at this organization because of my religion. It's unlikely to be the mainstream religion. It's unlikely to be a non-religious group who are following that. So even if you get a big red line there and you don't know what religions, what races, what ethnicities, what orientations, and so on, you will still be able to get an indicator, right, go here, there's something that's on fire over here, let's do a bit more investigation. In places like Germany and Brussels, it's not illegal to ask that data technically. I've spoken to a lot of German lawyers and they're like, technically it's legal. However, I wouldn't want to be in court with this. I wouldn't want to be at a tribunal. Like they are not ready. They are absolutely not ready at all. And culturally, you know, even speaking to German EDI groups, they're saying, you know, even though we care deeply about EDI and about race and ethnicity in particular, we are even still not comfortable with this just because it's so new and it's so just awkward. Let's just not do it. So we don't ask those demographics there either. So we flex our demographics based on what country that we're dealing with. But we have those baked in questions so we can still get an indicator. But as I said, we don't launch anywhere where it's illegal to be LGBTQ plus because we have those questions baked in. I have, you know, missed out on professional opportunities because of my LGBTQ plus identity. You're outing yourself as having that identity. And no one can find out who you are as an individual. However, what we wouldn't want is for, you know, an organization, say, worst case scenario, they go through a campaign of anyone who even appears to be in any way indicating that they may be LGBTQ plus, because people know that there are people who identify that the organization gets, you know, chucked out the company or worse. So they are the only places we don't operate. However, there's still a lot of stuff you can do, and we are working on a specific framework. It's really important to be culturally sensitive, essentially. And one of the things that I'm really conscious of is not, you know, ramming westernized EDI down people's throats, you know, on the other side of the world, because, you know, the UK, who do we think we are? We've got to launch in a really culturally sensitive way, depending on the country that we're looking at. And so we're working on a specific Middle East assessment, which is going to be the same, so very, very similar, the same sort of value outcome, essentially. So how are you feeling? Are you included here? Are you getting the opportunities that you want? Have you faced anything terrible, etc., etc.? But they're going to be asked in a different way. They're going to be asked in people's own language, in using the idioms and the idiosyncrasies and those, you know, turns of phrase, which doesn't look like a straight translation. We're going to work to make it culturally sensitive. So yes, it can be a tricky one when you're talking about, you know, countries where what is totally everyday and totally accepted here in the mainstream is just not, you know, okay. You do have to be sensitive.
Thanks for that. That's super, super helpful, and something that I think we're just seeing more and more is this idea of how do we go global? How, you know, what does that look like? So that's super, super interesting. I'd love to get a bit more into the practicalities of DE&I data collection with you now, because it's just such an interesting query that we get quite a lot. And again, sometimes we tend to see this more from smaller organizations or organizations on a growth journey. And as much as we would all love to be doing diversity and inclusion data perfectly, and we'd love to all be able to have a powered by diversity there with us setting everything up, that's not the reality for many organizations. There are going to be people in teams who have got very limited time, who have got to work out how to do this alongside a lot of other different responsibilities, and sometimes with very little resource. So if we can't roll something like this out perfectly, how do you go about tiering a process where you can prioritize certain areas and meet the needs of senior business stakeholders who are telling you maybe things like, we're interested in getting more women into our company, that's our focus, that's where we want our money to be going, so maybe there's a slightly narrower view there that isn't ready to be changed? How do you still move towards great diversity and inclusion data collection and disclosure when you've got a process that can't be perfect at the first step? Yeah,
that is a great question. We created our platform to be financially accessible for every size of organization. So I would just say, if you are a small organization, you can get our data for 500 quid, and it's not, it feels like nothing. However, if people wanted to do it themselves, what I would encourage them to go through the process of is, you know, designing those questions to be really smart based on what you actually want. So forget about what you think, forget about all the surveys you've seen in the past, start with a totally mentally clean slate, and think to yourself, what is going to make me get up and act? What data can I see that is going to help me to act next? So don't ask any questions where you are going to need to ask 20 whys in order to get value out of that data. I feel like I belong here. It's the worst offender. So we use that as a benchmarking question at the top. So you just want to see the green line go up on that question and the red line go down year on year. That's all you want to see. You can get no information from that question. Yes, we can demographically disaggregate it. We can see that it's all racially marginalized groups. It's predominantly your parents and carers that are shouting out. However, why did they not feel like they belong? And that's where the diagnostics come in. So don't ask any really high level. If you've got, say your leadership team said 10 questions max, we can't bother people with any more than that. Your questions need to be really actionable. So it could be something like, I feel valued for being my authentic self at this organization, for example. So that is one that I would highly recommend over, I feel like I belong here, because what you want to know is that that's that psychological safety coming in. I would also ask a specific psychological safety question. So something like, my opinions, my thoughts and opinions are valued at this organization, for example, or even encouraged and valued at this organization. Actually, forget about encouraged and valued. That's asking two things. That's another point I'm going to come back to. So my thoughts and opinions are encouraged at this organization. So that's a really great question about psychological safety. So those two together will give you a great idea of whether or not people are bringing themselves to work every single day and feeling valued for it. So, oh, Kat, you're not yourself today. You're a bit quiet in that meeting. Where's that energy, you know? Rather than, Kat, you were a bit, you know, excitable in that meeting. They were very professional clients. Just try to smile a little less, which is actual feedback that I have had in my career numerous times. Smile less. You don't look professional. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's that, you know, feeling valued for being your authentic self. I'm bringing myself every day, and when I don't, it's noticed, and people comment on it, and they want me, they want all of me just as I am. And then the psychological safety question is obviously, therefore, we're hiring for diversity, we're bringing in all this great talent. Are they getting listened to? Are their opinions being brought out? You know, are we creating an environment where all this amazing talent can come up with their ideas and disagree with people and, you know, play devil's advocate and all that good stuff? Are people going to be able to call it out when something's gone wrong, or when they're going, oh, I know this is due to go to print in an hour, but I'm not comfortable with this. I want us to pause and just do a timeout and go back, because, you know, I just need to say this, regardless of intrapersonal safety thing. So that those two, I would say question design on those two are really important. Ask something about professional opportunities. So something about the fairness of your professional opportunities. I feel like I can progress at this organization, for example. I see this organization as a place where I can work, you know, long term, those sorts of things. So you want to know that they can see themselves professionally moving on at the organization. And then I would, in that vein of super duper specific, what do you want to get out of those questions? So a lot of people, they think we need an EDI survey, but actually you need to start with the why. You know, what do we want to do from this? If it's, you know, we need to hire more women into the organization, I personally would go for qual research with a task that specific. I would go for qual research, sit down and talk to focus groups full of women who are already in the organization and ask them, what attracted you to this organization in the first place? Was there anything that put you off? Was there anything in the interview process that we could change to make it feel more inclusive? How's the website? How does the website read for you? And then women from outside the organization, have a look at this website. Does this seem like a company you'd want to work at? Oh, why do you think that? That's interesting. Have a look at this page. What do you see there? And so on. I think with something that specific, you don't need a survey. You need to go and speak to people and look into their eyes and hear what they have to say.
That's so interesting how you're giving us this totally different view of the qualitative, the meaningful types of information that you can collect starting from potentially zero with this type of survey. And that gives you kind of that fresh start where you can start going from scratch. I bet there are going to be some organizations though that are going, yes, but my boss just wants to see this number go up. and they're going to be sitting there going, we want to see diversity and inclusion like disclosure rates go up. So whilst I'm completely very much bought in and aligned to what you're saying about we should be doing it like this, alongside that, there are going to be people who are really battling to change internal opinions about what's important. So in terms of giving them a little bit of help, I guess we've talked a little bit around it's important to position, it's important to have a really clear statement about why you're collecting things. Can we talk a little bit around those just black and white steps that now we need to be talking about for any kind of survey, irrespective of quality? Obviously, we want to see quality improve, but what are the things that we need to be saying to position these surveys well with employees?
I mean, it's the big glittering why again, isn't it? I quite love that question about my boss just wants to see this disclosure rate go up. The thing that we recommend, if people aren't disclosing, it's showing they're not psychologically safe to do so. They don't want to. And the more you try and batter them into it, the less they're going to stay with the organization. You're going to be shooting yourself right in the foot. However, I'm not completely naive. I have worked in a number of those organizations where the boss says something, maybe the hand gets slammed down on the table. Yeah, I understand. So it's about making people feel safe to disclose. So this is the big glittering why, and that's where I would turn that back on the leader and say, do you know what? I really want to see that too. I would love for you to stand up on the stage and do a piece about how important it is to you. So we had an organization that they were not engaging their employees. So the employee side is left open for 3 weeks and their engagement rate was tiny. I'd done all hands with them. They'd met me. They knew it was anonymous and so on. And the HRD messaged me and said, oh my gosh, no one's doing it. What's going on? What's going on? So I said, who else has done it? She said, oh, the CEO's done it. And he was really grieved with how many questions there were. And he didn't understand these societal questions about, why are you asking me about in society? This isn't to do with our organization. And I'm like, that's why people are not, because he thinks D&I is very stupid. And that will be seeping out of his every pore. He needs to get in front of his organization and he needs to tell them how important it is and get him to switch his mindset from 30 minutes. Oh my gosh, 30 minutes is a very long time to spend on answering these questions, inordinate amount of time, to actually, if this is all you're going to do in 1 year, you spent 30 minutes queuing for your lunch in Leon, or never takes 30 minutes in Leon, you know what I mean? 30 minutes is nothing in a year. If that is all you are going to do to help marginalized groups this year, please commit 30 minutes. If we believe in EDI, like we say we do, we should all be able to spend 30 minutes answering these questions. Come on. She was like, okay. So the CEO stood on stage, talked about how important EDI was for the organization, and their engagement rate went right up. I think they almost had a full completion rate because they wanted to hear their leader say that it was a good thing to do, say how much she believed in it. And, you may not say it explicitly, or think this is all a load of nonsense, but people can tell. People are not daft. People can read between the lines. So I would put that back on the leader, actually, in a very nice and kind way, and say, you are an influencer of our opinions. Please, can you help me by getting up and telling, how important EDI is to the organization? And if you can intersperse it with a personal story, more's the better. So everyone is diverse. He may have, I just said he, I just assumed it was a man. They may have, a child with a neurodivergence. They may have a sister with a disability. They themselves may have had mental health issues, all of these different things, but you can't tell what a person is and how they identify by looking at them. And so the more you can get leaders to go, I myself care deeply about this particular part of it. Maybe they're a really engaged parent and they've never missed a sports day and flexible working is super important to them. Whatever aspects of diversity they can talk about themselves, more the better, and people will engage.
That's so interesting, that idea of like, how do you communicate the positioning of this type of activity in an authentic way, and a way that isn't just, because like you say, people can read past that kind of thing. They can very easily call a play. And I think that's a big thing that happens in this kind of like sometimes underground views of what's going on with diversity and inclusion activities, is this idea that it's not authentic, and people can see that it's coming from maybe a slightly different position than the one that's being stated at the top of the survey.
Yes.
I would love to just kind of talk a little bit around this as well, Kat, because we've heard from lots of signatories on diversity and inclusion data, and actually our report that's coming out on the 1st of March, for the first time, we're actually publishing disclosure benchmarks. So we're going to be able to share what is an average disclosure rate by different size, so you can get a sense of how are we doing. So it's a really interesting finding that we'll be sharing around that. And one of the things that we've heard from this is that it's not just about collect this information and position it really beautifully when you're doing this particular cycle of diversity and inclusion data collection, but it's about positioning it in context of the organization. So how often are you going to ask for this information? Do people know when to expect that cadence to be? Is it going to be the same next time? So there's this idea that it can't just be positioning it in the moment once really well, but positioning the entire process within the culture of the organization that's really come to light for us, particularly in a few organizations that have got really great disclosure rates across very large employee bases. So we're going to be winding up this conversation in just a few moments. So I would love to just take the opportunity to ask anyone who's with us if you have any questions around diversity and inclusion data, and these can be specific to your organization if you want to say who it is, but you don't have to, and that can be directed just to Kat, or it can be a general question. So if you've got any questions, do flag them now. And whilst we're just waiting for those, Kat, I would love you to give us just the top tips. Give me kind of, if you take nothing else away from this call, what are the things you need to go away with knowing to try and make sure diversity inclusion data disclosure can be improved in a meaningful way?
Yes, definitely. So I would be amazed if anyone hasn't taken the big glittering why away. But in terms of going more into that why, if you could be as specific as possible. So if it is in order to be more competitive, if you're in a competitive marketplace, for example, if you want, it can be innovation. So we want to innovate more. We know, that innovation is fantastic. Absolute top tip, read Rebel Ideas, because Rebel Ideas is a fantastic book. And that is often what I give to people who maybe are not on board with it, senior leaders, CEOs who are like, DEI, why bother? It's an HR thing. Why would I bother with like this? And you're like, oh my gosh, there's such fantastic examples of why different perspectives, not even about DEI really. I mean, it is. It's totally about DEI. This is the way I sell it to them. It's not a DEI book by Matthew Syed. He's a cool guy. He's a journalist, and the way that he writes it is, oh, look how much more, how less dreadful this thing would have been if they just had a person who knew about that thing. These really simple things of, oh, we just had no one in the room who knew that, when it's a really obvious thing. So I'd say read that book. Make your why really glittering and also hyper specific. So if you're looking to improve the fairness of your social scene, then say it's because of that. If you want to get more X group in the building, say it's because of that. And then make your questions, ask one thing and one thing only. So make sure you're not accidentally asking two things. So, I think I gave an example where I said two things, like my opinion is sought after and valued, or something like that. Only ask one of those. So choose one of those things, because they may be like, sought after, but then they never value it when it, they always ask me for my opinion, and then they never do what I say. So make sure you're only asking one thing. If you can, make sure it's totally and utterly anonymous, even if you have to get, a contractor in for one day to be able to launch the thing and then go through the data and anonymize it. Just try and make sure that it's anonymous, where you're gathering those opinions, some of which may be controversial, because you want the truth and you don't want it to be, overly positive just because people know that, it may be career limiting, which you sometimes find. I think that's it. Oh, yeah, the biggest one ever. Please make sure you act on the data that you get. The most important thing, so this little process that I've talked about in the beginning is like a tiny moment in the life of a Powered by Diversity member. So it takes 3 weeks to gather your employee assessment data. The rest of the 12 months is spent acting on that data, reporting back. You said you wanted to hear this, here's this thing. You said you wanted us to focus more on this thing. Here's a talk, here's a person, here's a bit of training, here's an article, that sort of stuff. So make sure you're always referring back to the data you've gathered, because that captures people in a couple of different ways. One, it captures those groups who didn't engage, and they're like, why are you banging on about this data all the time? I don't think that. I think that's nonsense, actually, and I don't want that. Maybe next year I'm going to have my say, and I'm going to stick my oar in, and then we won't be focusing on the thing I don't think we should be focusing on. Lovely stuff, because engagement rates go up year on year. But also it shows people that you've listened, obviously, and then they're going, wow, they've really paid attention to what I said. I said that. This is great. I want us to focus on this more. This is fantastic. That wasn't that 30 minutes worthwhile. So make sure you're acting on it and reporting back all the time.
Amazing. Kat, thank you so much for joining us for this Signatory Forum. Really, really fantastic insights and great tips from you there. We've popped the link to Powered by Diversity, Kat's organisation, in the chat there, so you can reach out. And we've also popped our link, so do follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be publishing our annual Diversity in Tech report on the 1st of March. So really grateful for everyone who's come along to participate today. Thanks so much. And thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, folks. Bye.